We'll now convene. Due to the shelter in place and COVID-19, the Technical Coordinating Committee has chosen Zoom as its meeting platform. During the meeting, please mute your mic. If you haven't already done so, please mute it now. Christina, please take the roll call.
Okay, please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Committee member Anderson? Absent. Committee member Ballinger? Absent. Committee member Bobadilla? Absent. Committee member Chen?
Here.
Here. Committee member Cunningham?
Present.
Here. Committee member Conradi?
I'm here.
Excellent. Committee member Diaz? Absent. Committee member Dillard?
Here.
Here. Committee member Fay? Absent. Committee member Reeves?
I think Jerry is here.
Is
Yeah, I think I
Jerry
saw
here?
Jay Fahey. Yeah. I thought I saw his name.
I see him on the
Reeves
screen.
needs to Be promoted to a co-host.
Say that one more time, Marianne?
Reeves needs to be promoted to a co-host.
Melody?
Melody. Yeah.
Okay.
And do we have committee member, I see committee member Fahey here.
He needs to be promoted.
Gotcha.
Committee member who?
Present.
Committee member Kersavan?
I am here.
Committee member Mercerio?
Here.
Committee member Nelson? Absent. Committee member Ortiz? She's here.
Here.
Committee member Parikh? Absent. Committee member Rahani? Absent. Committee member Singh? Absent. Committee member Smith?
Here.
Here. Committee member Wang? Absent. Committee member Wells?
Here.
Here. Vice Chair Greenblatt?
Here.
Here. Chair Renders?
Binders here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Christina,
Thank
you
you,
could probably get
Christina.
a verbal from Jerry now. We finally promoted him.
Jerry just texted me. He said he does not have a microphone, but he's here and
Okay,
listening in.
excellent. So we've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 members here and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 members absent.
Great. Thank you, Christina.
You're welcome.
Okay. I will request any committee questions and comments on an agenda item. If you'd like to speak, please physically raise your hand. As the co-host to the meeting, you do not have the ability to raise your hand via the Zoom platform, but you do have the ability to mute and unmute yourselves. Christina and I will call upon you. Please unmute your mic. After you speak, please remute your mic. I will request any public comment. If anyone from the public attending the meeting wishes to speak during an agenda item, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. Christina and I will call upon you to speak and unmute your mic. You will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, your mic will be automatically remuted and your hand will be lowered. If an action is required on an agenda item, the chair will call the vote. Christina will conduct a roll call vote. When Christina calls upon you, please unmute your mic, announce your vote, and then remute your mic. So the next item on the agenda is public comment. Christina, have we received any public comment?
No, no public comment.
Okay, is there anyone wishing to speak during public comment on an item that is not part of the agenda? If so, please raise your hand and staff will call upon you. Seeing none. Can't really see. Okay, I assume there is none. The next item on the agenda. Whoops. Is the election of chair and vice chair for 2020. Typically, the vice chair, in this case, Leah Greenblatt, would rotate as the new chair. And for this cycle, a transit operator is due to fill the vice chair. So does the committee have a nomination for vice chair? Do I hear a nomination? Transit operator?
Maybe, this is Stephanie, maybe it'd be helpful for the folks here to know who are on the call. That's a transit operator,
Oh.
the staff's name. So Ricky Wells from BART, I see Melody from County Connections, correct? Am I missing anyone, Christina? I'm just going by memory here.
Rob Thompson from
Right.
West.
West Cap.
And Jim Conradi with AC Transit.
Okay, so those 4 members could be vice chairs.
Might we ask if any of them are interested?
They're due up. Is member Wells here?
I'm actually willing to do it. I was waiting to see if any of the bus operators were interested first. I think primarily because they have, I'm not saying we don't have a vested interest in what goes on with CCTA, but I think as actual operators directly funded by CCTA, they might be better than BART, but I'm more than willing to do it.
Oh. Do we have a transit operator? A bus operator here today?
Hi, this is Melody. I support BART taking that role if they're willing.
I didn't hear that.
Oh, sorry. I just said I support BART taking
that
that
my
role
connection?
if Ricky is willing. Can anyone else
Oh.
hear me?
Is that a
Yes.
nomination? And can I have, do we also have the nomination about the chair as well?
Oh, I don't know if we got,
Can
that
I
was,
include the nomination for both chair and vice chair in one motion?
Paul, can you hear us?
Paul?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Melody,
Yeah.
did you want to make a motion for chair and vice chair?
Sure. Sure. I will make a motion to nominate Leah Greenblatt as chair and Ricky Wells as vice chair.
Excellent.
In that
Thank you.
motion?
Thank you.
All
And
right.
committee member
Do we have a
Cunningham,
second?
second?
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, John. All right, so we're ready for the vote.
Okay.
Is there, oh, I'm sorry, do we have any comment, public comment? Seeing none?
We actually have to do a roll call vote since we're doing
Okay,
the live stream.
please conduct the roll call vote.
Okay, Committee Member Anderson. Committee Member Ballinger.
Committee member Ballinger is, I know she's not here today.
Okay. Committee Member Chen.
Aye.
Committee Member Cunningham.
Yes, and Jerry Fahey reports yes too via text.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Committee Member Conradi.
Aye.
Committee Member Dillard.
Aye.
Committee Member Reeves.
Aye.
Committee Member Hugh.
Aye.
Committee Member Kersavan.
Yes.
Committee Member Mercerio.
Aye.
Committee Member Nelson. Committee Member Ortiz.
Aye.
Committee Member Smith.
Yes.
Committee Member Wells.
Yes.
Vice Chair Greenblatt.
Yes.
And Chair, is it Reinders?
Reinders,
Reinders.
yes,
Thank you.
yes.
So we.
And thank you, committee members. I will now turn it over to your new chair, Leah Greenblatt. Leah, take it away.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your support.
Speech.
Oh, there will be plenty of that right now. So that our meeting can be a little bit more efficient, due to the large membership of this committee, we can elect to hear all of the action items, including staff presentations, public comment, comments by the committee. And if there is no opposition on an action item, we could move to the next item on the agenda without taking a motion or vote, meaning we don't have to go through that roll call every time. After all of the regular agenda items have been heard, we could combine all the action items under one motion, and then I would call for Christina to conduct a roll call vote. So I guess, is there any opposition to us doing that? Raise your hand. Yes, we'll get through this a lot faster. All right, my assistants who I'm counting on to monitor everything, Stephanie and Matt, and I'm not sure who else is, Christina, if you're still here. We're okay? Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the approval of the summary of actions from September 19th, 2019. Are there any changes, comments, etc. from the committee? If so, please raise your hand. If anyone from the public would like to speak, please raise your hand. Do we have any hands raised?
No hands.
Most excellent. All right. So since we have no opposition, this motion and roll call vote will be made after the regular agenda calendar. All right, moving on. The next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Are there any changes, comments, etc. from the committee? Does anyone want to pull an item? If so, please raise your hand. If anyone from the public would like to speak, please raise your hand. Do we have any opposition or?
Could I make a comment from the staff, Leah?
Sure.
I just want to note that we sent out a replacement attachment for the Danville Park and Ride peer review item. We placed the same comment matrix in both peer reviews. So we wanted to make sure you had the correct one.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kelly. You know, that reminded me of another housekeeping thing. The CCTA staff told us earlier that if any of the committee members arrive late or leave early, we need to announce that. So anybody sneaking in late, I'm assuming that Stephanie and Nat will catch them. And if anybody who's got to dash out early could maybe type something in the chat, that would help us all out. So
We don't have chat.
okay, forget it then. They're gonna have to keep tabs on you.
They could use the little wave or clap
Yeah.
reaction.
Okay. All right, so moving on. So we had no opposition to consent. So we'll take care of that at the end with our big motion. So the next item on the agenda is an informational item on project monitoring. Stephanie Hugh will present the item, and if you're following along in the PDF or the agenda packet, we're on page 56.
Okay, thank you, Leah. You guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Hope you guys are doing well and staying safe. So this item is a regular agenda item for project monitoring. As Chair Leah said, it's on page 50. The attachment starts at page 59. So it monitors STIP, OBAG, ATP, HBP, HSIP, and inactive projects. The STIP table is shown on page 59. This is an updated table including 2020 STIP projects, which was approved by CTC in March. If you recall, we took this to TCC probably half a year ago. So you'll see two projects that we nominated from Contra Costa, which is the Treat Boulevard Complete Streets improvements, and also the SR4 operational improvements on the westbound direction. So those two projects were added. And then attachment B shows the OBAG projects, which is on page 61. That is the 1920 fiscal year 1920 projects. And happy to report that all of them have been obligated. And so our attention now is on the fiscal year 2021 projects, which are shown on page 62. So bulk of our county's OBAG projects are currently programmed in this in the fiscal year 2021. The table shows a lot more projects than the previous pages. So these projects need to be obligated by January 31, 2021. And MTC prepares an obligation plan during the summer of this year to basically it's a confirmation that the projects are moving forward. And in order to get on this obligation plan, the projects shown on this list will need to have completed their field review by July. So if your agency has a project on this list of the fiscal year 2021 list, please start working with the Caltrans local assistance staff to schedule a field review meeting. I've heard that they're doing a lot of them online now. I guess they meet and get on Google Earth to just field review visit virtually. So please start working on that if your project is programmed in fiscal year 2021. And if you think it is not likely you can meet that deadline, please reach out to me and we can reprogram your project to the next fiscal year, which is fiscal year 21-22. And that requires a TIP amendment. And if that's the case, you can work with us and we will reprogram your project with a TIP amendment. So just reach out to me if that's the case. And then lastly, I just wanted to draw your attention on page 71, which is a list of inactive projects. And this month, there's quite a long list, and a lot of them have a note that the project is in danger of losing funding. And it might be caused by COVID, people are not in the office and slower to invoice, whatnot. So please work with your DLAE to invoice ASAP, or some of them is maybe a question. So resolve any issues that you guys have with the projects. What I'm hearing from MTC and Caltrans is that there is no exception to the 6-month invoice requirement, even due to COVID. So please continue to invoice for your projects in a timely manner to avoid being on this list. That's all I have. With that, I can answer any questions that you guys may have. And again, this is an informational item, so no votes needed.
Great. Do we have any comments from the committee?
Just a quick one. I had reached out to our public works staff since we're on that list, although we're not shown as being in danger of losing funding. And they told me that the delay is being caused with Caltrans.
Yeah, Alex Wong, that's the one. Yeah, I think he's your contact. Yeah, he reached out to me and that's correct. So I trust that he's working out that issue. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other comments? All right, any public comment? All right, thank you, Stephanie. Let's see, where are we here? So the next item on the agenda is another informational item on the proposed interim measures to prepare for Measure J sales tax revenue reduction due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have Hisham Noemi presenting on this item, and it begins on page 72 of the PDF. Mr. Noemi, are you here?
Yes. Good evening. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Hisham Noemi, and I'm the Director of Programming at CCTA. It's good to see everyone. I will be providing you with an update on what the board approved yesterday to prepare us for COVID-19. Since we just don't know how bad things could get with our revenues and the economy, the board adopted basically several actions to prepare us for the worst case scenario. The goal here is to make sure that our revenues, our Measure J expenditures don't exceed our revenues when the measure expires in 14 years. So that's number one. And the other one is to make sure we have continuously a positive cash flow as we get there. So we keep an eye on these two things as we move forward. Let me share my screen first. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I have a few slides to share with you. So when the voters approved Measure J in 2004, there was an assumption made on how much revenue the measure would generate. Based on that revenue assumptions, as you know, the expenditure plan assigned funding to specific capital projects and to specific programs. The plan, unfortunately, did not have a contingency line item for downturns in the economy, like the recession we had in 2008, and what we're going through now. And as you know, the programs are mostly operational in nature, like the school bus programs or the transit operations or the street maintenance money. These programs do get a fixed percentage of our revenues each year, although the amounts fluctuate each year based on what we collect. So if you look in the expenditure plan, 57.5% of our revenues go to the programs. You know, that what makes up that 57% is the 18% return to source, the 5% for operations, and so on. The remaining 42.5% of our projected revenues go to projects. That amount not only pays for the projects themselves, it also pays for the debt service on the bonds we've issued to accelerate the projects, the issuance cost for these bonds, as well as the program management costs. As you know, just like Measure C before, the authority took the strategy to accelerate project delivery in Measure J. So we issued bond against the project portion of our revenue, that 42.5%. That allowed us to build projects sooner at a lower cost. We were able to take advantage of low bid climate during the recession, low interest rates on bonds, and took advantage of state and federal money in 2006 and 2008, the Proposition 1B and the stimulus funds. To ensure that project expenditures and the debt service cost stay within the 42.5% of our revenues, the authority updates the strategic plan every couple of years. We carefully review our revenue projections and debt service costs during the update to see if we're still on track to meet our projections or if we need to make adjustments. When revenue forecasts, when the revenues come in below the projections, we basically end up deprogramming funding from future projects so we can stay within that 42.5%. What we're trying to avoid is not impacting the operational programs. However, as the list of future projects gets shorter and shorter with time, as we're accelerating our programs, our project delivery, our ability to deprogram funds from projects becomes more limited. We will have less and less projects to deprogram funding from as we move forward in the measure, as you will see shortly. So about 7 months ago, the board approved the 2019 Measure J strategic plan. And in that update, we reduced the revenue forecast in anticipation of a slowdown in the economy. We reduced our overall revenues by about $136 million and deprogrammed about $96 million in project funding. Despite that effort, it appears that COVID-19 will take a bigger bite of our revenues. As you can see in this chart, we were on course to beat our forecast until COVID-19 happened. The dark line, the black line, shows our actual revenues based on the adjusted mid-year budget that the board approved yesterday. That decline is sharp and deep, and at this time, no one knows how bad it will get or how long it will take us to recover. If you look at our overall capital projects delivery in the strategic plan, in the 2019 strategic plan, after we adjusted for the lower revenues, we had about $754 million in Measure J funds programmed to capital projects. And as you can see in this chart, by the end of this fiscal year, we anticipate spending 96% of that amount. So that leaves us only about $30 million to be expended on capital projects over the next 14 years. And out of that $30 million, there is about $20 million for projects that have not yet started, as far as we know. If we deprogram funding to these remaining projects, we should be able to take a $47 million hit to our overall revenue without impacting our commitments to ongoing projects where we appropriated already Measure J money, or the Measure J programs where we don't have to go and reduce the percentages that go to the different programs. But we want to be prepared for a larger hit because the board has not yet adopted a new revenue forecast that takes us through the end of Measure J. So to do that, the board basically yesterday approved several actions in Resolution 2009P that help prepare us for that larger hit. And I'll go through them next. The first action, basically, they wanted to suspend new appropriations to start new projects. That not only applies to the projects in the strategic plan that are currently programmed, but also the TLC and the Bid Buy program. We cannot approve any new appropriations until we have a new revenue forecast. We can make exceptions on a case-by-case basis if the sponsor demonstrates potential loss of other funds, especially federal or state money. Not only that will help us preserve our remaining Measure J funds, but it will allow us, hopefully, to build a shelf of ready projects in case we get stimulus funding from the feds. Basically, any projects we end up delaying can be our first priority to fund from federal stimulus money. I want to note that this action does not apply to the operational programs like the return to source or the bus operations. These programs will continue to get their allocations. The second action is related to project savings. We anticipate we will have about $4 to $5 million in savings on some of the projects we're managing, like the 680 southbound HOV or the Highway 4 East widening, as well as the landscaping at the Caldecott Tunnel, among others. These savings we will be keeping in a reserve and not reprogram to other projects. Having that reserve will help us cushion the impact of COVID-19 without having to take money from other projects. The third action is something we're already doing. You know, many of our Measure J operational programs like bus service and school bus programs, they receive funding at the beginning of the fiscal year before actual revenues are known. To avoid over allocation, we basically keep 10% of that allocation until the end of the fiscal year when a true-up payment is made. We will continue to do the same based on our reduced revenue forecast for next fiscal year to avoid over allocations. Also, the board yesterday agreed that we should allocate 6 months at a time as opposed to a full year to give ourselves flexibility in case things get worse. And then the fourth action is something that the board already agreed to do in the last strategic plan, which is to delay issuing the next calls for project for the TLC and the bike programs. Just like what happened in 2008 recession, where we had to basically defund the East County share of the TLC program to keep our commitments on Highway 4 and EBART, we may need to do the same this time as well to avoid impacting the other operational programs. By doing that, we can absorb another $50 to $70 million in a hit on our revenues through the end of the measure. And the last action is meant to help us with our cash flow. You know, we have received grant funding for several projects. We will end up basically submitting reimbursement requests monthly as opposed to every 2 to 3 months, basically to reduce the amount of Measure J we have to front on these projects. The board also authorized us, actually, before we go there, the board, I want to talk about some of the other stuff we're doing at CCTA. We are talking to our partners to see if we can reduce the demand on our Measure J funds. That includes talking to FHWA or FTA, as well as the CTC, to see if we can reduce the match requirements on some of the programs. If they agree to that, basically that means we don't have to put as much Measure J projects, Measure J funds on projects. We also asked FTA on one of the awards we got, the ADS grant. We got $7.5 million award recently for advanced driving system project. So we asked them to make the costs that we incur prior to the pre-award audit eligible for reimbursement. I'm glad to say they agreed to do that, which saved us about $765,000 in Measure J funds. We're also monitoring opportunities to reduce interest cost on our issued bonds and looking for ways to use other fund sources to supplant our Measure J funds on different projects or programs. For example, you know, we are asking WETA to use RM3 when it's no longer under litigation for the Richmond Ferry Service for the next couple of years instead of using Measure J. By delaying our allocations of Measure J, basically it will help greatly our cash flow. As you know, that the ferry operations cost us about $3 to $4 million a year. So that will be very helpful if we succeed to do that to our cash flow. We're also Yesterday also the board agreed that we take a couple more actions in the future, which is to begin working on an allocation plan. That plan basically will look at all of our existing contracts and appropriations to local agencies to see if they can be terminated, suspended, or reduced. The goal here is to plan for deeper reductions on our revenues until we have a better revenue forecast. In this process, we will end up prioritizing these contracts and appropriations, which will help us as we develop the next strategic plan update. And I will go into that in a little bit more detail shortly. The next action they also agreed that we need to start working on is maybe the development of a fund exchange program. As you know, it takes money to get money. For example, federal funds require generally 20% match. Some of the programs in SB1, they require 30% match or 100% match. Without having matching funds from a new measure, since it didn't pass, we really don't even have a chance to compete in some of these programs. So we're looking for possible options to help us get matching funds. One idea was maybe we loan our STIP money that's currently programmed to some of the state highway projects in the 2020 STIP to other counties or other CMAs in exchange for them giving us flexible local money. You know, STIP money are very restrictive. We don't always have the ability to use them as a match. Local money, on the other hand, don't have these restrictions. So if we can find that deal where a county can agree to take our STIP money and pay us maybe a year later with local money, that would help us greatly because that local money is flexible and it can be used as a match for on any of our projects. So that's one idea. The other idea is to consolidate our programmed STIP funds that we have now in the 2020 STIP on a single project to get it shovel ready and maybe provide the needed match. For example, right now we have about $20 million programmed for 3 major state highway projects that have a total of $200 million in shortfall. We were hoping with the new measure that shortfall will be covered, but since now we don't have a new measure, we need to think about maybe focusing that $20 million on a single project rather than the 3 to help us advance at least one of them. So that's another idea we're toying with to see if it could work. And also we will be looking for ways to build a shelf of shovel-ready projects that can take advantage of stimulus funds. For example, if a sponsor requests Measure J funds to start construction, even if it doesn't fit our description of a new project, we may put the request on hold for a few months since the project might be a good candidate for stimulus funds. As you know, if we get stimulus money, they will ask for projects that can be delivered basically in a couple months or 6 months. So that's something we're thinking about. We, of course, have to evaluate each project and each case carefully to ensure that we're not putting other funds at risk. So back to the allocation plan. Many of you probably wondering about that. Sorry, I forgot to change the slide. These are the next 3 slides are the list of projects basically that are programmed in our 2019 Measure J strategic plan before fiscal year 20 and or are programmed in the TLC BBTF programming documents. And the common things between them, between all these projects, is that they need future Measure J appropriations from the authority. So we organize these lists by when these projects expect to need the funding. So the first page is we expect them to need funding by the end of this fiscal year, by the end of this calendar year. The next one is by September of 2021. And the third one is after that date, after September 2021. And these lists, we try to basically show you who the sponsor is, the project name, how much the cost of the project based on our strategic plan or the QPSRs, and how much money is at risk in terms of Measure J, how much money we anticipate them to come and ask to complete their projects. And that's what's at risk at this point because of COVID-19. And also then we're showing, have they received Measure J funds before on the same project or not? And the type of funding that's at risk, whether it's Measure J strategic plan funding or Measure J funding from the TLC or the PIT bike program. So everybody probably has a project on this list, and I know you probably are very anxious about the status of your project. So these are the projects. So what an allocation plan will do, it basically, as I mentioned, will apply to projects that are programmed in the 2019 strategic plan before fiscal year 26. Basically, that's within the window of the strategic plan, or in the TLC and PIT bike programming documents. But the common thing, as I mentioned, these projects need future Measure J appropriation. We have programmed money for them, and they have not yet received these appropriations. So what we're proposing to do is develop an allocation plan and prioritize allocations to these projects using the criteria you see on your screen. Basically, we're trying to, we should basically focus on projects that are at risk of losing other funds if they don't get their Measure J money. We should focus on projects that are shovel ready and projects that are a component of a larger project where if it doesn't take place, the larger project will also be at risk. So I want to emphasize here that by being basically on this allocation plan, what will the allocation plan will show is a prioritized list for allocation, but that doesn't mean the authority will make the allocation. We will not know if we can make any allocations until a new revenue forecast is adopted by the board and we started updating our strategic plan. If, for example, the revenue forecast shows that we have to cut another $300 million in our revenues through the end of Measure J, we will not be able to fund any of these projects, regardless of how these projects basically rank in this allocation criteria. If, on the other hand, the revenue forecast comes and says, you only need to cut $50 million from your overall revenue, then most likely we'll be able to fund many of these projects that you see on these lists, but not all of them. So that's where I want to end for any questions. Basically, in the next few days, next week and the week after, CCTA staff, Jack, Stephanie, and myself and others will be calling each project sponsor, talking about their projects, trying basically, they will have a checklist with their hand based on these principles to figure out which ones really should rank at the top in terms of future allocations. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And by the way, we plan to bring this allocation plan to the board either in June or in July, most likely in July, because it'll take us time to work with all the project sponsors. So whatever we end up with, we'll bring back to TCC to review.
Tom, committee member Mercerio has a comment. Sorry.
Thanks. Can you go back to those and let those sit on the screen for just a little bit so I can take a picture of where ours is?
Absolutely.
maybe sit on each one for a little bit so people who have.
Okay, so that's the first one.
Could you maybe just share with us this PowerPoint?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe after the meeting, I can send you a copy of it.
Thank you.
Hisham, this is Andy. Thanks for the presentation. If an agency has multiple projects on the list, is there potential to keep one project whole and potentially reduce even further appropriations being shown on the list, or eliminating a project even to make sure that one of the other projects remain whole? Is that an option?
I think it is an option, Andy. We will talk to each sponsor, including Danville, about their lists individually to see what their top priority is and how ready the project is. I mean, there is no doubt we're going to end up making cuts. I mean, just to give you an idea, our budget for this current fiscal year was in January was in March adopted in March at 94 million just before COVID-19. The board yesterday basically revised it down to 80.5 million. That's basically a 14% cut from the 94 million we had. Next year, we're looking at $76.5 million budget compared to what the strategic plan assumed of $92 million budget. So there will have to be cuts if we can, I forget the word, if we can just focus on the top priority projects on these lists that we really have to move forward, that will be very helpful. So I appreciate your comment, Andy. We'll talk more to you about the projects in Danville to see what the top priority is and how we can move them forward.
Okay, thanks, Hisham.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
You know
sir.
what would be helpful for some of us, if as you guys ask your questions, if you could just identify yourself, because
Oh, Andy Smith, Walnut Creek, or Transpac. Can I ask a question?
please do.
Thank you. So this is actually a question being passed on from Matt Todd, who's our Transpac executive director. Wanted to know confirmation, will we be able to program the fiscal year 2021 line 20A funds? That's the senior transportation, senior and disabled. Will we be able to program for this coming fiscal year, noting that we have the funding level we want to program already available and collected?
The programs are basically get a fixed percentage of our revenues. So they're not impacted by what I just talked about. We're not suspending allocations to the programs. These will continue, although they will continue at a lower level because they get a fixed percentage of our actual revenue. And our revenues are down basically. So for this fiscal year, for example, they will get at least 14% less than what we thought they will get at the beginning of the year.
So, and I'm not as up to speed on this as Matt is, but the money, the 20A funds for fiscal year 21, those are those not already collected from the previous year? Isn't there like a delay in when we receive them based on the money's already collected?
No, I'm not sure if Peter is in the meeting, but the way I understand the programs work, except for the return to source money, which the cities get after the fiscal year ends and after they meet the checklist, most of the programs we have, the operational programs, bus operations, the paratransit, and so on, they get actually their money at the beginning of the fiscal year based on what we project the revenue will be.
Okay.
So what we do is we basically give them 90% of their money and keep 10% in case something like this happen, where we need to, where we don't have to, where we want to make sure we're not over allocating. And then once we have the final fiscal year revenue estimate, we make a true up payment at the end. You know, if we have to pay some of that 10% to the agencies, we do that.
Okay, so then, so I think I understand, and if Matt should probably talk to Peter Engel then for, you know, actual real nitty gritty details about all this.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you much.
You're welcome.
Any more questions from the committee? Do we have any public comment on this item? No one's speaking up. So let's see. This is a information item. Am I right?
It is an informational item. If you have comments on the principles for the allocation plan, would like to hear them. Otherwise, you know, we'll be working with each one of you individually if you have a project on that list before we come up with that allocation plan. And again, being in the allocation plan doesn't guarantee that you will have funding because we still need to make sure that our revenue forecasts support these type of level of expenditures. But if the revenue forecast come in and we are able and afford to make allocations, then we will use that to prioritize our future allocations.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Hisham. That was very informative.
Hisham, you're going to go ahead and forward the PowerPoint to the TCC?
Yes, Christina will take care of that. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right.
Sean, could we have you unshare your screen?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Chair, question from staff or a request from staff. I think Christina has an announcement, but I just wanted to request that we take the micromobility item ahead of the GMP item. Our consultant who's presenting has a schedule that needs to maintain.
Okay. And did you say there was another comment from staff too?
Yes, I had a quick comment. I have an alternate here, Robert Thompson, who's actually been here since the start of the meeting. He is here for committee member Anderson, and he did say that he had to sign off at 3:30. So I just wanted to note that.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we're going to go to micro mobility. Let's see, growth management. Where are we? That's item 5. That's what you want to do next, Matt?
Correct.
Okay. So the next item on our agenda is an informational item on the Contra Costa Micromobility Forum recommendations. And Mr. Kelly will present this item.
Thank you, Chair Greenblatt. As part of the adoption of the 2018 Countywide Bike and Pedestrian Plan, there were several implementation tasks that came out of that. Our board recommended a few items to move forward. And one of those was developing a micromobility framework for the county, or basically setting the stage for micromobility in Contra Costa County. PlaceWorks, our on-call planning consultant, developed a series of white papers and as well as hosting a micromobility forum at the authorities' offices back in December. So what David Early and Tarina Wilson, both from PlaceWorks, who are here today, are going to present is the findings from the second white paper, which basically focused on reporting out from the Micromobility Forum. I think he's going to get a little bit into white paper number 1, which talked about micromobility in general. And then we'll talk about the recommendations from white paper number 2. So I'm going to turn it over to PlaceWorks, and David, you should be able to share your screen.
Great. All right, well, thank you all for having me here today. I am going to go to share my screen, and it'll take just a moment here to pull it up and make it look like it's supposed to look. All right, there you should see now our blue slide, the topic being shared micromobility. And I know there are a number of you here who've actually seen this presentation in some other settings, and I apologize for any repetition, but I know other members of the TCC have not seen this. And so we did want to go over it just to make sure everybody's aware of where CCTA is moving on micromobility. And I'll be the first to admit that micromobility is one of those topics that, compared to COVID-19 overall or the drastic changes in the CCTA budget, I realize it's probably not on the top of your list of priorities right now. And at the same time, we certainly hope that as the economy does come back at some point, that commute patterns will be shifting, and it may actually be an opportune moment for micromobility to become a hotter topic even than it's been in the past. So I think it is important to be preparing for it. My presentation today is going to cover 5 items. I'll be giving you an overview of what we mean by micromobility. I'll be explaining to you the results of the forum, which, as Matt mentioned, we held in December, our recommendations to you, a summary of comments received from the county's Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee, and then talk about the next steps that CCTA and staff are undertaking. And I'll just go through the whole presentation, and then I'm available to answer questions afterwards. So to give you an overview of what we're talking about, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, but I wanted to make sure we all have the same definition in mind. When we say micromobility, we're talking about shared forms of transportation that utilize the spaces that are suitable for bicycles, and that generally include either electric scooters and both electric and pedal bicycles. These are technologies that, depending on exactly which one you're talking about, are generally suited for trips of 5 miles or less, and in most cases would be suitable for most people for a trip of only 1 or 2 miles. And they can be administered as both docked systems, like you see in the lower right-hand photo, for instance, the Bay Wheels or Ford Go Bike program that exists in some parts of the Bay Area, where the bicycle is docked in a dock or holder. There are also dockless systems, which are applied to both bikes and generally scooters, where a user can leave them wherever they want to. And there are hybrid systems, where a single piece of infrastructure can be left either in a dock or without a dock in another location. So these all exist, and they all qualify as micromobility. There are a number of micromobility providers in the Bay Area, and they can be divided into 4 separate groups. First are those that are focused pretty much solely on provision of micromobility itself. These include Bird, which also owns Scoot, which is a pretty well-known company because of the way it grew so quickly a few years ago. Lime, who many of you know from having formerly operated as Lime Bike in Contra Costa, and continues to operate scooters, although no bicycles, in other parts of the country. Spin, who has bikes only, and Ojo or Gotcha. Gotcha is a subsidiary of Ojo, and they are also a bicycle provider and the ones who've been selected to provide service under a contract in the city of Richmond. There are also additional micromobility providers that are part of larger vertically integrated companies. Lyft has acquired Bay Wheels, which is the MTC-sponsored docked bicycle program in San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland as well. Uber owns Jump, which is a bike company, and CycleHop and Hopper are an amalgamated firm as well. There are some companies that specialize solely in providing bikes at corporate settings. One example is Bikes Make Life Better, who is the provider at Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And then there are also companies that are actually focusing on creating a shared technology platform to allow for micromobility, but because they're testing that platform, they're also in some cases providing bikes and scooters in order to test their own IT platforms. And those include Clever, RideCell, and Social Bikes, and Social Bikes is also a manufacturer and provider of bikes as well. We see micromobility as having an opportunity to create a number of opportunities throughout the sort of transportation space. It is a way that we might ultimately decrease both VMT and traffic congestion, which of course might lead to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions as well. It does that particularly by filling the need for first and last mile trips that might have other been made by car or transit, particularly if we can get a person out of a car or out of a Lyft or Uber and get them on a bicycle or a scooter instead. That obviously saves commuting, saves traffic, and saves GHGs. And in doing that, it can also alleviate both parking and kiss and ride needs at transit stations. So in that sense, it really is a very attractive opportunity. I would say particularly for last mile trips, that is when a worker has arrived at a destination for their workplace or to go shopping or something else and wants to make a short trip, or even possibly to get from their home, particularly in a more urbanized area, from their home to a transit station. These can be quite attractive opportunities. At the same time, they also create a whole number of challenges. And some of these, which you see listed here on these slides, include equity, that we found that there is unequal access to micromobility across demographics because of affordability, use of payment plans, and so forth, and because of reluctance by providers to deploy in some neighborhoods versus others. We also know that men are more likely to use the technologies than women, perhaps because men are more willing to assume some of the risks associated with the technologies. We're also, I think, many of us aware of improper storage. These can be found to clutter sidewalks. They can create barriers. They can really be unsightly and dangerous in various places. There's been a lot of evidence, particularly at the beginning of these companies, that their equipment had very short operational life. There were some reports of birds, scooters needing to be disposed of after about 3 months of operation. We're hearing from the operators that they're working on that, and the technologies now have much longer lives of 1 to 5 years, but that was certainly an issue at the outset. There have been safety issues, people unwilling or unable to use helmets, and the fact that scooters do have higher injury rates even compared to bicycles. There's murky regulatory authority. There are non-matching regulations from one community to the next. There's a lack of regulation in many communities, a lack of ordinances. So those have been an issue. And in communities that, despite all these issues, do want to attract these technologies, the technologies have actually been difficult to attract. The private providers only want to go to the most lucrative markets, and some communities that would very much like to see these technologies deployed within their limits are unable to attract them. So those are some of the challenges that one sees on top of the opportunities that micromobility provides. Given all of that, it is important to understand the qualities that do attract the providers. What we found is that denser, more urban neighborhoods are those where providers most like to roll out because of the larger number of users, and particularly in many of those communities, younger and hence fitter users tend to be in those denser areas. They also look for areas with existing good quality bike infrastructure to make it possible and safe for users to use both bikes and scooters within that infrastructure. They look for available funding. Not all markets can support themselves through funding, and therefore some subsidy is sometimes offered or required. They look for a consistent regulatory framework, both internally consistent within a jurisdiction to make sure that that jurisdiction is going to treat them well. And they also look for consistency from one jurisdiction to another. And then they also can look for minimal competition. That is, many communities that do attract these would end up giving essentially licenses for exclusive use to one or several vendors. And that's also attractive to vendors to make sure that they're not going to have large numbers of competitors in their markets. So for those communities that do want to attract them, making sure that they have all 5 of these things in place in some way can make a big difference. So let me talk a little bit about programs in Contra Costa County. I think many of you are probably familiar with some of them. Lime Bike was available as an undocked bicycle component a couple of years ago in both El Cerrito and the Greater Walnut Creek area. Lime Bike, after about a year of operation, did close those two bike programs and subsequently went out of the bike business altogether and is now doing scooters only. There is one current program that we're aware of, which is in Bishop Ranch with dock bicycles that you see in the lower right-hand picture here. These are bikes that are available to workers within Bishop Ranch, and they can actually be ridden off-site, even left overnight at a person's home and then ridden back during the day, but they are exclusively for the use of Bishop Ranch employees. There are 3 pending programs in Contra Costa as well. The city of Richmond has received one of 2 MTC grants to create hybrid bike share programs as trials. They've selected Gotcha to be their vendor, and my understanding is that they have hit some problems in terms of deploying the program, primarily because of supply chain issues that Gotcha has in getting their bikes actually delivered from China due to COVID-19. The city of Walnut Creek has also been developing a scooter share pilot program, which they hope to use to attract 1 or more scooter operators. They're still in the process of finalizing that program and don't have any operators yet. And then finally, MTC is in the process of rolling out a Richmond-San Rafael Bridge e-bike commuting program, and that's just getting started as well. So with all that in mind, we did hold a forum on micromobility at CCTA's offices on December 4th. The purpose of this was both to give an overview of what's happening with micromobility to the jurisdictions in Contra Costa County and to gauge jurisdictions' level of interest in pursuing shared micromobility systems. And we had 2 panels, which were then followed by Q&A and discussion. First was a panel from agency representatives that included Kirby Olson from the city of Oakland, who oversees micromobility there, Ozzie Arce from the city of Walnut Creek, who's developing their program, and Heath Maddox, who currently oversees these technologies for BART, but actually developed the city of San Francisco's program before going from San Francisco to BART. So he has quite a bit of expertise from the San Francisco side as well as BART. We then had a panel of 3 providers. We had Calvin Thigpen from Lime, a representative from Hopper, and a representative from Clever, who all spoke about what they perceive as both the market and what providers would need to be successful in the marketplace in Contra Costa County. From that forum, we were able to develop a set of recommendations, which appear in the second of our 2 white papers. The first of them was to establish a Contra Costa County micromobility working group, which we have since fine-tuned to say that that working group would be the existing CB PAC, and they've offered and requested that they be allowed to provide that role. Secondly is to work with the existing Bay Wheels program to deploy in some areas of Contra Costa County. Third would be to attract new micromobility programs and to consider perhaps financial support, although that's with local money, of course, very difficult under the current circumstances and probably not a starter. But it is possible that there might be other grant funding available. There have been grant programs already, and it might be possible to apply for some of that grant funding if it becomes available again. The fourth recommendation is to create a model ordinance and regulatory program, which we are thinking of pursuing. This would not, of course, be required by anyone to adopt it, but cities that wanted to take advantage of this model ordinance and regulatory program would be able to do that. And then finally, the last recommendation is to facilitate agency coordination, particularly with the East Bay Regional Park District, because they operate the Iron Horse Trail and other significant trails where this technology can be used, but also to work with BART regarding their stations and how micromobility might connect there, as well as with bus providers. We have presented this report already, both in writing and in person to the CB PAC, and got a number of comments. We received written comments from both East Bay Parks as well as WCTAC, and then we got other comments at our meeting with them earlier this week. They did support moving forward with the model ordinance and utilizing the CB PAC as the micromobility working group. They also voiced concerns about user safety. They wanted to make sure that we really do work to educate elected officials about these programs and some of their advantages, because we're aware that they can also be seen to have liabilities with them. They suggested considering infrastructure improvements that would support not only bicycle and pedestrian users, but also micromobility users. Looking at the county's existing draft of a micromobility ordinance as a starting point as we look at a model ordinance, considering equity within the programs, and implementing the programs with coordination at the regional and sub-regional level. So those are some of the comments that we have already received. Staff is moving forward and bringing recommendations to the CCTA board. This will include establishing the CBPAC as the oversight committee or coordinating committee, working on a model ordinance and regulatory program, and working with agencies to coordinate use of these technologies throughout the county and with other outside agencies like East Bay Parks and BART, and then continuing to gauge jurisdictional interest on CCTA guidance and assistance with micromobility implementation. So that concludes my presentation, and I can take the slides back down, but so that you all can see each other, but I'm happy to answer any questions any of you may have, and we can put the slides back up if there are specific items you want to see.
Andy Smith here. I've got a question if no one else does.
Go for it.
David, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if you might have some special insight that you might be able to share with us with regard to the impact of the pandemic on the shared micromobility companies themselves. You know, before this all came to pass, I was hearing, I myself was a little skeptical of their business model, at least without using public funding. And I was hearing similar skepticism from experts in the field, in the transportation field broadly. Now that COVID's come about, I'm kind of seeing two things. One is it might bankrupt some companies. And, you know, we're seeing like Uber sold whatever their product was to Lime. Lime is at least temporarily pulled out of the state. At the same time, though, I'm also seeing people writing about how, well, given that everybody's going to be afraid to go ride transit, this might be a resurgence in and a blossoming in this field. What's your opinion? What do you think?
My opinion is exactly what you just said. I mean, you said it, I think, much better than I could. That was hardly a question, Andy. It was really an insightful comment. It is true that at least the last I heard is that of 4 licensed providers in San Francisco, 3 had ceased operations, what was announced as temporarily due to COVID-19. 1 of them did continue to operate. There is obviously much less traffic right now in commercial areas. Downtown San Francisco, downtown Oakland are quite vacant. So there just aren't the users there to possibly create financial support for the programs. I can say personally, I've actually ridden a Go bike or a Bay Wheels bike a couple of times during the pandemic to get across Oakland, and I think there are some people still doing that, but it's much less than it was because most all of us are in fact staying at home. I agree with you that this could really be financially the end for some of these companies. But at the same time, many of them were largely venture funded still. They're still nascent companies. So I think that assuming that, as you said, that commerce comes back overall, that some number of people are going to offices, going to workplaces, going to downtowns and central business districts, that probably at least some of the companies will come back, they will redeploy. And I think we might see more users at least per capita than we did, for the reasons that you've talked about, that people may be reluctant to get on transit and want to find a different way to make a short trip or a mid-length trip, a trip longer than they would walk, but where they're not wanting to take transit and may not have an access to a car. So we're just going to have to wait and see. There's really no way to predict it for sure.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the committee or members of the public? All right, this is an informational item, so we'll thank David and Matt for bringing it to us.
Okay, and we're going to sign off, Tarina and I. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, David and Tarina.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, so we took that item out of order. So we're gonna go back to, oh, we did that one. I guess it's item
Should be
3.
3-3. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is the Contra Costa County's priorities for development of project study reports. And Stephanie Hugh will present this item, and
Yep,
I've got
thank
it
you.
starts on page 83.
Yep, page 83, and this is an action item.
Oh.
So Caltrans is requesting Contra Costa's list of priorities for PSR development or oversight by Caltrans on projects impacting their state highway right-of-ways for the next 3 years, which is fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 23, in order for them to manage their staff resources. So as you may be aware, when we compete for STIP funding, highway projects need a PSR in order to compete for STIP, and for non-highway project, a PSR equivalent is required. And also projects need to be on the current MTC RTP in order to be included in the on the PSR list. And also project sponsors have to reimburse Caltrans for their oversight efforts on these PSR developments. And so in developing the draft PSR list for fiscal year 21 to 23, which is shown on page 85 of your packet, there's a table there. That's our draft list, staff. What I did was I reviewed the current RTP project list and identified projects that would impact Caltrans right away and would therefore need a PSR. I reached out to these project sponsors and found that none of them were ready to place their projects on the list. And so this is reflected on the staff report, which states that the previous PSR list will remain fairly the same, with the exception some dates have changed in the schedule. However, WICTAC reached out to me this week, or the authority this week, and would like to add a few projects on the list, a total of 5, which is a result of their recently adopted West Contra Costa West Express Bus Implementation Plan. And these projects could fall into the programmatic category of the RTP. And then CCTA also added 1 extra project for the Innovate 680 Shared Mobility project. And so I was hoping to share my screen because I just updated the table per Leah's list that she shared with me. So hopefully I can do this successfully. Can you see that? Can you all see a PDF table?
Yes,
Yep.
but it's kind of small.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay, so this is the first page. Okay, so the 5 projects that Leah added are highlighted in yellow. So they are, I think 3 of them or 2 of them fell into, or 3 of them, 2 of them fell into fiscal year 21-22 calendar. So they are the Wright Avenue Mobility Hub, the Richmond Parkway Transit Center Access Enhancement and Freeway Access Improvement, and in the fiscal year 23, the San Pablo Dam Road Freeway Access Improvement Project, the I-80 part-time transit lanes, and the San Pablo Dam Road Mobility Hub. So those are the 5 projects that the WICTAC has requested to add to the PSR list. And then the authority is adding this last item here, the Innovate 680 Shared Mobility Hub, which is along 680. So in total, we've added 6 projects after the production of or mail out of the TCC packet. So this table I'm showing now will replace the table shown on page 85. And I'm happy to email this out as well if you guys are interested in seeing the latest table. And again, this project list is updated every year. Caltrans usually asks us to update this list, looking out 3 years ahead. So there are opportunities to add to the project list if desired, if their project sponsors are ready to move forward with their projects. So with that, I'm asking for approval of this list covering fiscal year 21 to 23, including these additional 6 projects that are shown in yellow, and happy to take any questions, and the action will be taken at the latter part of the meeting.
Right. Thanks,
I'll-
Stephanie.
So I'll leave this up in case anyone wants to see it, and I'll scroll up if you like. I don't know if there are any questions regarding any of these projects or
Do we have any questions from the committee?
I have a question,
Dina?
please, with the city of El Cerrito. Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, hi, everybody. I just wanted to know, Caltrans doesn't have a limit on the number of projects, is that correct?
No, there's no limit. It's just for them to manage their resources.
Right.
Yeah. So since you're speaking of Yvette, I updated your project, which is number 6.
Yes, thank you.
With the correct date. And let me know if it's correct, or email me if you have changes.
That looks good. Thanks, Stephanie.
Okay.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, any public comment on this item? All right, it looks like, and is there any objections from the committee? Because otherwise we'll, as Stephanie explained, I don't have my cheat sheets available right now, but we'll take this as an action item at the end of the meeting. Stephanie, can you?
I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, thanks.
You can go back.
Thank you. Okay, so seeing no opposition, a motion and roll call will be made after the regular agenda calendar. And then we're going to move on to item 3, or, the update on the growth management program task force efforts to implement Senate Bill SB 743 into the GMP. And Matt will present on this item, and it's an informational item and won't require any action. Go ahead, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair Greenblatt. Let's see if this will let me advance my slides here. Something's going on. I'm going to redo this real quick.
I noticed that the agenda says it's an action. Is this informational or?
Sorry, Andy. Yes, it is an informational item. That was a mistake in the.
Yeah, no problem.
The agenda. Yeah, we're working with a new software package for our agendas, and sometimes copying from one meeting to another.
I've been there, done that a few times.
Oh, good.
You have my sympathy.
Yay. This is really weird because it's not giving me the controls to move. Oh, there we go. They were just delayed reaction. Okay, so I'm here to talk about what the growth management program task force has been doing up to date. And basically, as Leah mentioned, it is focusing on implementing SB 743 and VMT into the growth management program. I'm going to apologize once again for all the folks that have seen this presentation. This has some new elements to it, but as Orinda Council member Amy Worth said last night at the authority meeting, you need to see this a lot of times. So she said it, not me. So I will move forward then. So let's talk about the goal of the task force. So you probably, most of you remember a year or two ago, we had a series of planning directors workshops where we focused on the growth management program, SB 743, and how the two would interact. And we also discussed what types of resources the local jurisdictions as lead agencies would be looking for in order to implement the changes in CEQA into their own work plans and processes. We've had 7 meetings to date of the task force since October. We met 2 weeks ago, and we'll have a couple more this summer. one of the main goals was to apply a consistent philosophy in the GMP to the new CEQA requirements. So where LOS was memorialized in the GMP before, VMT will now be memorialized, but it's a slightly different animal. So it took some TLC and a lot of conversations to do that. Other outcomes would be, as I mentioned, guidance to local jurisdictions on how they can implement this locally. An updated set of MTSOs. As you know, the action plans also have LOS and other delay-based measures, vehicle delay-based measures sprinkled throughout. So we're addressing that. And then we'll be revising the growth management program implementation documents, including the technical procedures. So the meeting we had 2 weeks ago, it actually focused on the MTSOs. We took a break from the VMT side of things and focused on MTSOs. We had sent out a survey prior to the meeting to the jurisdictions looking for their appetite for new MTSOs, gauging their appetite. There was a lot of support for new bike and pedestrian related MTSOs as part of routes of regional significance that would be bike and pedestrian facilities. Transit MTSOs relating to our transit lines around the county, and safety related MTSOs. We also heard that you'd consider MTSOs related to climate change, and that could look at mode share or mode shift. We think VMT probably isn't a good measure for a particular roadway, but VMT would be a good way to assess kind of cumulative impacts at the RTPC level by looking at VMT for the action plan as a whole. Equity was also mentioned as a measure folks would like to consider moving forward. There were some topics that people said, let's not even go there, so we didn't move forward with those. Comments that we also heard was, MTSOs need to be monitored and consider staff time and resources when coming up with new MTSOs. Jurisdictions want to be able to actually have some sort of effect on their MTSOs. So, requiring them to have control over the freeway may not necessarily be the best, action, because cities don't have control over the freeways. And don't tie return to source funds to MTSO performance. That's the way it is today. We don't plan on changing that. Okay, diving into SB 743. The intent of 743 was to really manage congestion management, but also meeting the state's greenhouse gas goals, reduction goals. And that could be done through promoting infill development around transit stations. That's what SB 743 really does well. It also seeks to promote active transportation, bike and ped modes, and increase public health. And like I mentioned, meet the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals. SB 743 changes vehicle delay in CEQA as the significant impact, and adds VMT as that new measure. It doesn't change state general plan guidelines. It doesn't affect mitigation programs or other police powers that you currently have as jurisdictions. Timing of this, you probably all know this just as well as I do. It's been going on a long time. It's been simmering since 2013 and going through all the state guideline development and incorporation into CEQA. We now know that it has to be implemented July 1st. And really you don't have to do anything by July 1st. It's just if you have a project, whether it's a development project or a transportation improvement on the state highway system that you are, and your environmental document is not, adopted or certified, then you're going to have to go by the new rules. So it's really about new projects, but you can adopt the necessary CEQA thresholds on a project by project basis. So this is getting into that, what you're required to do as a local agency. You are the lead agencies under CEQA. So you will be required to establish guidelines for how our projects, for how you analyze new projects under CEQA. This is focusing on development, residential, commercial types of projects. How you measure VMT for those projects, and what the methodology is for measuring VMT. You are required to adopt thresholds. As I mentioned, it can be on a project by project basis. You don't have to adopt citywide thresholds. You have to define projects that don't require further VMT analysis under CEQA. They can be screened out, and I'll get into that in a minute. And that what defines a significant impact under CEQA. And then what are feasible measures to mitigate those VMT impacts down to an acceptable level. You probably all know this, but I'll go over it again. So how you measure VMT or express it is very important. VMT in general includes every trip you and every member of your household takes. But when you're looking at VMT for a project, you don't want to look at every mile you travel or everyone in the household travels, or that's just not a good measure to analyze a development. So the picture on the left shows every trip you're taking, 29 miles. That's your VMT per capita. But when we're looking at a project, we want to look at it based on the type of project. So for a residential project, we'd be looking at the VMT produced at home or from home. And that, if you're just looking at the trip you take from home to work or home to the coffee shop or home to the store, then that's a number around 16 maybe out of your 29 total miles. When we're looking at commercial type of developments, developments where people go to work, we want to look at the workplace VMT. So for a new office project in downtown Concord, how many miles are people traveling to get there? And the average commute to jobs in Concord may very well be 11 miles, but that's what it's looking at. The distances people travel to that location to work there. CEQA, the third bullet, CEQA guidelines, you're allowed to choose how you measure, but as part of the growth management program, we are coming up with guidance for that, as we did for level of service. So mitigation is a huge part of this. If your project doesn't meet the thresholds that we've established in the GMP, then you'll be required to mitigate. So how can you mitigate a new development project to reduce its VMT? One is looking at the types of land use. Is the project residential only? And if you added a retail component to the ground floor, increasing the uses there, adding a cleaner to the ground floor, a gym, something like that, would that reduce the VMT and keep some of those trips locally? If you move the project, if the project's being proposed on an empty lot a mile from a transit station and you moved it to 1/3 of a mile from a transit station, that's going to really reduce the VMT produced by that project, because a lot more people would potentially take transit due to the location. TDM types of mitigations, we've always depended on these. So, having a development provide transit passes, or a car share program, or a on-site work, location. Though that could definitely reduce VMT, but it requires monitoring to affirm that it is doing those reductions. And then there's regional levels of mitigation. We currently use impact fees. We, right now our impact fees are trip based. We need to figure out how we can do mitigations based on the VMT. And then there's exchange banks or VMT exchanges or VMT banks. They're two different ideas that we've been considering. We think it would be useful for projects in areas that have a hard time meeting the VMT thresholds. They would be allowed to pay into the bank or exchange, similar to cap and trade and the carbon credits we have here in California, that would allow their project to go forward, and it would be mitigated at a regional level with a project that could really have some major greenhouse gas or major VMT reductions and greenhouse gas reductions, like a large transit project. Okay, so one of the main goals of the task force has been to come up with a VMT policy that becomes part of the growth management program to replace level of service. I probably should go over these charts first, but I'll talk about basically what we're looking at here for the policy. So it would define how you analyze different types of projects, the residential versus the commercial, how you would screen out projects from further analysis. And like I said, I'll get into that. The significance level, what do you have to mitigate? What levels do you have to mitigate a project down to in order for it to, be below the significance threshold in CEQA? I think both those bullets hit on that. And then how can you continue to use level of service under the GMP? You can't use level of service in CEQA, but we've heard from you that you want to continue to use it. We will continue to allow it under the growth management program. Cities want to be able to use it to analyze operational improvements when it comes to a new project. You need to know how to time your signals, things like that. So you would certainly be able to use it when looking at a project's impacts. You just can't use it in CEQA. So here's kind of where the rubber meets the road. This is each jurisdiction's VMT per capita. The blue bars are the VMT per capita. This is for the home-based VMT. So when looking at a residential project, this is what you would be looking at. We've got two different regional averages here. We're allowed to be flexible on the definition of region. So the red line is the Bay Area region, the 9 counties. The green line is the Contra Costa County average. These dashed lines are 15% below those averages, and the OPR technical advisory, everything memorializes the 15% below the regional average as the recommended threshold. We are sticking with that number. It coincides with the greenhouse gas goals for the state, and we think it's the legally defensible threshold. Anything less than 15%, we think will be challenged in the courts. So we want to have policies that could at least stand up to the letter of the legislation. So I'll just point out a couple of examples here. Projects in Richmond, they're below both regional, 15% below both of the regional averages. So any new residential project in Richmond, regardless of size, would basically be presumed to also be a low VMT producing project because it is in a currently low VMT location. They would be screened out from further VMT analysis. I hate to pick on Antioch, but I don't think they're in the room. So their VMT is above both the region and county average. So they would be required for new development projects to do the VMT analysis. And then they would be required to mitigate to either 15% below the regional average, or here's the twist, 15% below their citywide average. We wanted to provide some flexibility to jurisdictions and give them a you can call it a higher or lower bar, basically a higher bar, no, a lower bar. Sorry. So instead of Antioch having to mitigate down to this line here, this dashed line, their mitigation level would be somewhere around here, 15% below their total. So we think that gives some of these cities, especially in East County, you know, some options. They're still going to have to mitigate, but not all the way down to this level. So I'm going to jump over to the workplace-based VMT. There's a little bit of a flip here. You can now see those East County cities that were way up in the residential VMT are now well below both the Bay Area region in red and the county in green. So Antioch's going to have a lot easier time approving commercial-based developments. Whether the developers are wanting to come into East County and, you know, develop, that's still, you know, up in question. But, you know, the cities may be able to attract developers in with the fact that it's a lot easier approval, and we know that East County is seeking new jobs, so that might be an opportunity for them. Capitalize on the capacity on the freeway and BART system in the reverse commute direction to get some workers out there. And here we are going with, on the workplace side, we are going with the Bay Area region average. It's higher, so and job trips are more regional in nature. So that's kind of why we chose the two different regional definitions. Home-based trips are a little more local in nature. Workplace trips are more regional in nature. And then also you know, these cities over here, Orinda and Moraga, would have to mitigate to 15% below their city average, not the regional average. Okay, this is basically just a summary of what I just defined. Housing projects would use home base and the countywide average. Employment generating projects would use the commute based VMT and the regional average. There are projects that don't really fit into a nice box. So for those types of projects, hospitals, local serving retail, schools, certain types of industrial projects, we are going to come up with some guidance for that as we go along. So projects that, regardless of what jurisdiction they're in and what the VMT is on that chart, we wanted to provide some exemptions there. So projects in transit priority areas, basically within a half mile of transit, a major transit station or major transit lines, would be exempted. Projects of less than 10,000 square feet of non-residential space, that's what's in the OPR guidelines. We did the math and that equates to 20 residential units or 836 vehicle miles traveled per day. So those projects would be exempted. And then transportation projects that are presumed to lower VMT, that's, you know, most all bike ped and transit projects. They would be exempted from the VMT analysis. And then the last two bullets go back to what we just talked about, projects in those jurisdictions that are 15% below the regional average. Sorry, this is a long presentation, guys. I'm trying to get through this. This just really documents what I just talked about. in terms of the level you're required to reduce the project's VMT output to 85% below the regional average. In terms of providing resources for mitigation, we are going to be developing a toolkit with urban design strategies that, with and land use strategies that could assist in designing projects that would have lower VMT output, an expanded menu of TDM options with some quantified VMT reductions that can be expected from those. And then we're going to be working on that development of that VMT mitigation bank framework. We've applied for a Caltrans grant that we hope to hear about soon to develop that framework. So we don't have a schedule for that, but we'll be doing that as we can. And then the policy also provides an option for jurisdictions to adopt a finding of overriding consideration for a particular project if it's a unique type of project that really the lead agency cannot identify mitigations to reduce their VMT output. And you have to have some substantial evidence for that, but we want to allow, have that option for lead agencies. And then to, continue to allow level of service for operational analysis and mitigation, just not under CEQA. Okay, then what we also have heard from the task force members is they need a way to estimate VMT. We've done, the job of estimating your existing VMT, but how do you estimate VMT for a new project? So we want a consistent way of doing this across the county. We want to, take the guesswork that local staff has to do. And we want to make this available to project applicants so that they could try and reduce their project's VMT, before they get to the planning desk. What we've heard the functionality should be out of a tool is how much, first, does it meet the screening criteria? Does the project, can it be screened out from further VMT analysis? That's what you want to know first off. Second, how much VMT is it going to estimate? And so, the applicant or the city staff could enter in all the project characteristics, including the location, and get a VMT estimate for the project. And then as a developer or the city staff comes up with proposed mitigations for the project, what will those mitigations actually do? So we'll have a menu, it would have a menu of TDM options and other VMT reduction strategies. You click the 10 you want to apply to that project, and it shows you the reductions you can assume from that. Right now, there's two types of tools that are out there that some agencies have developed. Sandag developed one with a Caltrans grant where it basically is focused on mitigation. So you've got your project. How can you, what TDM strategies could do to that project's VMT? That's really all it's going to do. You have the menu of strategies. How much VMT reduction will that provide? It's a lower cost tool, but it does less. There's a web-based tool that does the three things that I mentioned on the previous slide. City of San Jose developed a very robust tool. It's now being adopted by VTA, and City of Concord actually has a grant from MTC where they've been able to adopt that tool. We are working with the consultant that has worked on all of those tools to get a new cost estimate on this. We hope we can lower it from that $200,000 to $250,000 range. Get it lower, we're not sure yet, but we're getting that estimate now. We've bandied about the idea of doing a cost sharing program with that. We'll continue to talk about that internally. We've committed to getting a tool developed. We don't know exactly what type of tool yet, but we do know that we think it would make most sense to get the most robust tool we can, and that's what we've heard from the task force. So we will be working to see what we can do to get the most robust tool we can. We just can't give you a schedule for that yet because we don't have the funds, but we will keep that conversation going. Some considerations for a tool is it defendable under CEQA? So we've got to have the research of these VMT mitigations in order, we've got to have that research in place to verify that those mitigations are real. But that is, much of that is already documented. This will focus on a project by project basis. As I mentioned earlier, we think we can assess cumulative effects on VMT at the RTPC level through the action plans. And then, who would use this? We think staff and project applicants could use it, as well as consultants. And then there's just issues that CCTA would need to deal with. Where does it get hosted? Who pays for the maintenance, and who does the technical support? Next steps for the task force. We've got a meeting on June 11th. We'll be finalizing that VMT policy. It will come back to the authority in July, and in the meantime, we'll go to the RTPC policy boards. We'll be working on technical procedures updates in the meantime. As I mentioned, we'll be working on the mitigation tool, and the MTSOs will be the subject of future task force meetings, and we'll bring that back to the RTPCs and probably TCC as well, once we have some new direction on the MTSOs. So I think that's it. Yes, that is it. So I apologize for taking half of your afternoon, but it's going to hit everybody soon, so I want to make sure you're ready for it.
Great, thank you. And don't everybody drop off. I know there's some people dropping out right now, but we need you for the next item where we take an overall action on everything. But before we go there, I just wanted to see if there's any questions of Matt on this item, or if we have public comment on this item.
Hello, it's Yvette with the City of El Cerrito. I just wanted to thank Matt and the GMP task force for doing such a great job. I think this information is going to be really helpful to us. And I'm hopeful that you'll get the grant from Caltrans to implement the tool as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. And I would also like to thank the task force members. They put a lot of time and effort, and I'm trying to, as we go around the county, I'm trying to remind your elected officials and others that staff is engaged and really thinking about this, this paradigm shift. So yeah, thanks to the task force members.
All right, anybody else waving their hands out there? Okay, we've got the all clear from Christina, I think. All right, good. So we go on here. Now that the regular agenda calendar and all action items have been heard, I will ask for a motion and a roll call vote to approve the following 3 items. Item 1A, approval of summary actions from September 19th, 2019. Item 2, approval of the consent calendar. And item 3.3, approval for the 3-year PSR list for fiscal years 2021 through 23. Do I have a motion?
So moved. This is Andy.
Great. Thank you, Andy Smith. And is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh, raising his hand.
Is that Eric?
No, that's
I see Paul Ryan.
Oh, okay, Paul. Seconded, and Christina, please run us through a roll call vote.
Okay, bear with me. We're almost over. It's almost done. So committee member Chen,
Aye.
committee member Cunningham. Is that a yes? Thumbs up? Yeah. Okay. Committee member Conradi. Thank you. Committee member Diaz. Committee member Dillard.
Aye.
Thank you. Committee member Fahey. Is he still on the call?
Jerry texted me, he says aye.
Okay, thank you. Committee member Reeves.
Aye.
Thank you. Committee member Hugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Committee member Kersavan.
Yes.
Thank you. Committee member Mercurio. How do you pronounce your last name? I'm sorry.
Mercurio. I sent you a note, so it's easy.
Mercurio. Thank you.
Yeah.
Committee member Nelson. Committee member Ortiz.
Aye.
Thank you. Committee member Reinders. Thumbs up. Committee member Smith.
Yes.
Chair or Vice Chair Wells.
Yes.
Thank you. And Chair Greenblatt.
Aye.
Excellent. So the motion passed
Great.
unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next item we have here is, are there any committee members have any other business to discuss? And my understanding is we have an announcement from Ricky Wells at BART.
Yes, so we have officially began the process of sending out a call for projects for our Safe Routes to BART program. And we're specifically looking for bike and ped projects that are currently at least 30% design that could use some funding. And the money is actually coming from Measure RR. And the call for projects will open on May 28th. And you can submit questions to BART up to June 8th for the June 11th webinar, and the application deadline will be July 23rd with projects being awarded funding in the fall. Most of you have received the email, but I don't think some of you have been on at previous RTPC meetings, so I'll work with CCTA staff to make sure it's included in whatever correspondence they can send out to you guys. So do we have any questions?
I think we're good. Thank you. Any other announcements? Other business? All right, seeing none. We'll adjourn this meeting at 4:33, and I want y'all to stay safe and have an easy commute home. And thanks for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.